They laughed until the harbour burned. That is the shock in a single line. A fabric and wood biplane, slow and ungainly, could turn a modern fleet at anchor into a wrecked tableau by dawn. The Fairey Swordfish looked laughable on paper. In hangars, it earned pitying smiles. In the briefing rooms of Japanese naval intelligence, it first triggered a similar reaction. Old tech, irrelevant. Then the British flew into Taranto, and the world that had written off the Swordfish changed its mind in one night. Listen closely. This isn't a tale of romantic nostalgia for obsolete aircraft. It's a lesson in what happens when clever tactics meet unprepared defences. On the night of November 11th to 12th, 1940, Swordfish biplanes launched from a carrier, threaded a hostile night, and struck the Italian fleet at anchor. Torpedoes and bombs hit capital ships that thought they were safe, moored, lit, concentrated. The damage was strategic, immediate, and humiliating. For naval planners in Tokyo, the raid was a revelation. The vulnerability of a fleet in port was not an abstract risk. It was a blueprint. At first glance, the Swordfish seemed the wrong tool for modern war. Slow, open cockpit, fixed landing gear, a relic. Yet these weaknesses were the very features that made it lethal in that context. Its low speed and stable handling were perfect for accurate torpedo runs at night. It could fly low and slow without stalling, aim precisely, loiter if needed. It could see what faster fighters might miss. The British exploited these qualities with surgical discipline, surprise, low-altitude approach, and the technical adaptation of weapons and tactics to the environment. Japanese intelligence read every line of the after-action reports. The reaction was not dramatic theatre, but the cold arithmetic of planners, recognition, recalculation, and urgency. Taranto didn't teach them that biplanes were superior. It taught them that static defences and concentrated anchorages were fragile points. If a slow plane, properly used, could cripple battleships at Taranto, then the same conceptual vulnerability existed at any major fleet anchorage, including their own Pacific anchorages. The implication was brutal. Detection did not equal defense. Detection without rapid, effective countermeasures was useless if the attacker had time, surprise, and the right approach. What did Japan do with that insight? They didn't merely file the reports away. Engineers and tacticians dissected the raid. The questions they asked were practical and unforgiving. How do you launch torpedoes in shallow harbours? How do you approach without setting off searchlights or waking coastal defences? Can your aircraft operate at night, over water, with the discipline needed? Do your torpedoes run properly in depth that differ from open sea? Those were not rhetorical queries. They went straight to research, to new training, to redesign. Taranto highlighted two technical problems that must be solved to replicate such an attack: weapon adaptation for shallow water and low detectability approach profiles. The Swordfish used known weapons but in unexpected patterns. You can't simply copy that pattern with different hardware and expect the same result, yet you can translate the idea. Japan's analysts did precisely that. They examined aircraft that were faster and more modern than the Swordfish, but could be trained to fly the same low, deliberate profiles. They studied torpedo behavior in constrained depths. They reheated the doctrine of surprise and combined arms timing. That intellectual shift of from dismissing a platform to extracting its operational idea is the real military lesson. There's also a human element that history sometimes flattens: the psychological flip. At first, Taranto caused scorn. By the third read-through of the intelligence packets, what had been scorn became unease, and unease became a burning, methodical study. Officers who once dismissed the biplane began to talk of unexpected methods and systemic vulnerabilities. That change of tone matters. Military cultures often cling to assumptions. Speed equals power, armor equals safety. Taranto punctured those assumptions. It forced commanders to imagine not their own ideal fights, but the worst-case asymmetry, a calm harbour that could be made a graveyard in hours. Japan's response was not monolithic hubris. It balanced daring with technical pragmatism. They ran experiments on torpedo runs in shallow water. They practiced night navigation over sea lanes they knew well. They rehearsed precise timing between reconnaissance, diversionary actions, and the strike itself. They studied aircraft types that could deliver ordnance effectively at low speed and low altitude, or else they adapted tactics to faster aircraft to mimic the Swordfish's approach envelope. The point was never to fetishize a biplane. It was to extract a repeatable method from a seemingly accidental victory. There was also an operational caution in the Tokyo files. Taranto worked because the Italians were anchored in a narrow, well-lit port with defences set for conventional attack, not a stealthy night raid. That exact combination, lighting, fuel and ammunition stored in predictable places, ships anchored close, was the exploitable weakness. Not every anchorage presented the same conditions. The Japanese planners were careful to evaluate variables: depth, shoals, local radar and searchlight coverage, and the readiness of anti-aircraft crews. They prepared options: dispersed moorings, blackout protocols, improved harbour watch, and changes to how torpedoes might be armed or stabilised for shallow bays. Adaptation, not imitation, became the watchword. The Swordfish's triumph also taught a deeper doctrinal lesson. Warfare is a contest of senses as much as of weapons. Taranto showed that reducing the enemy's sensory advantage, concealing approach paths, masking signatures, and exploiting darkness can multiply the effect of even modest ordnance. The Swordfish turned the environment to its favour. Japan's naval officers began to see war as a system problem. Sensors, weapons, human factors, and time all interacting. Small actions could cascade into decisive results if aimed at a system's brittle point. But let's avoid myths. The Swordfish did not win a war by itself. Taranto did not collapse Italian naval power, nor did it single-handedly produce Pearl Harbor. Yet the raid had strategic ripples. It reframed how navies thought about harbour defence, carrier aviation, night operations, and the use of obsolete platforms in creative ways. For Japan, its effect was to seed an intellectual willingness to use surprise and technical improvisation in ways that traditionalists might have resisted. There's a final, chilling truth in this story. Innovation often arrives in a vehicle people have already dismissed. The Swordfish is the archetype of that truth. It was not new, it was relevant. That relevance came from matching a capability to a vulnerability. Japan's lesson was not simply to copy the Swordfish, but to adopt its logic, find the vulnerability, adapt weapons and tactics, and execute with discipline. If you imagine the night at Taranto, picture this: black water reflecting searchlight beams, silhouettes of hulking hulls, and almost invisibly a ragged biplane slipping low across the waves. The enemy sees shapes, not threat. Then the stripe of torpedo runs, the explosions, the silence that follows. That silence was not mystical. It was the sound of a doctrine collapsing. For Japan, the lesson was clear and terrifying. No anchorage was automatically safe. And that realization reshaped plans, training, and the very idea of force projection. In the end, what Japan thought of the Fairey Swordfish evolved from mockery to strategic respect. The airplane itself remained a modest craft, but what it signified was monumental. A reminder that wars are won by ideas as much as by platforms. Taranto taught Tokyo that a simple tactic, ruthlessly applied, could expose entire fleets to existential danger. That knowledge haunted planners and changed doctrine. The Swordfish did not become a symbol of invincibility. It became a symbol of opportunity, a tool for those clever enough to see how to use it.